So the original Mavic Air had several improvements over the Mavic Pro. Now that the Air 2 is out, there are some exciting new features inside of it, but you have to use them properly. There are a lot of new features like HDR capture, high frame rate recording, and OcuSync. We'll get into all those later, but first let's set up the camera. So DJI has made this drone good enough for professional use, but easy enough so that anyone can fly it. Fortunately, they've locked things in right in the sweet spot for you, so only need to make a couple of adjustments before you fly. So go on into the settings, into the camera section, and select MP4. Then choose Decine-like mode. Decine-like mode is flat enough for color grading. It gives a good bit more in the shadow detail, and it's gonna let you work more with your color grading LUTs in post. For the coding format, H.265 is going to give you the best quality. And in the new advanced gimbal settings menu, these numbers will give you smooth control over the camera. It's best to keep your white balance on the Kelvin settings. This is going to keep your white balance from shifting in the middle of your shot. If you're unsure about Kelvin temperatures, a nice go-to Kelvin temp is 6,000 Kelvin. Now the HDR is the most overlooked feature of the Mavic Air 2. So let me explain. This is different than HDR recording. This actually captures a scene with greater dynamic range than is normally possible. You should really only shoot in this mode when the dynamic range exceeds what the Decine-like profile can handle, but as you can see right here, it's really impressive. But there are two problems with the HDR mode. The first one is that it's auto exposure only. So just be sure not to do any tilt-ups that reveal the sky because your exposure will start to shift. The second problem is the saturation roll-off into the highlights. This looks really artificial and it won't match your other footage. So how do we fix it? Well, it turns out to be a little more complicated than just lowering the highlight saturation. So I created a LUT for HDR mode to give you smooth saturation roll-off. It's totally free and I'll link to it down below. So the latest firmware has a 4K zoom mode. This crops the sensor in about 30% and gives you more reach. This can be useful anytime that you want more lens compression and parallax. So you're gonna do most of your shooting in Decine-like mode. You'll need to correct for the flat image that it records in. Of course, you can try to manually adjust the contrast and saturation. This can get daunting and it's very time consuming, and it's not an accurate way to correct for the profile. A better solution is to use a color preset called a LUT that's made specifically for the sensor and the color profile. So I created SkyGrades Natural for the Mavic Air 2. The natural presets give you bold, natural colors for Decine-like mode. There's also SkyGrades Cinema, which are vibrant, creative LUTs for the Decine-like and the HDR modes. Now the remote on the original Mavic Air used Wi-Fi to communicate with the drone. The Air 2 has the new OcuSync 2.0, which is by far superior. It's not only much more responsive, but it has this amazing range. In this shot right here, I'm over a mile away from the drone. Now like any drone, the sensor has a bit of noise in it. If this is your first drone and you're flying it for fun, you may not care about the noise. If you're using some of these shots in paid commercial video, you may want to clean up the image a bit. I always like to use a plugin called Neat Video for noise reduction. You just tell it the noise profile from the camera sensor and it takes care of the rest. Since HDR mode can boost the ISO for the shadows, it's probably a good idea to clean those shots as well. I'll leave a link below for the noise profiles and Neat Video. Now for shooting slow motion, there's 4K 60 frames per second, and it's just as sharp as 24 frames per second. Some people like to shoot in this all the time, but I like to stay at 24 frames per second most of the time. Now the Mavic Air 2 has higher frame rates, up to 240 frames a second. These modes look best if your subject has fast motion, and because they are pretty soft, you only really need to shoot with them if you plan on slowing them down in post. I found that the 240 frames per second mode is just as sharp as the 120 frames per second, so why not shoot at 240? So to review, you can shoot in decine-like mode most of the time, and use HDR mode when you're in a very high dynamic range situation like sunrise. Then use the free HDR LUT to fix that saturation roll off. You should also check out the SkyGrades presets. It's gonna take no time to apply a great looking color grade. So I hope that's given you an idea of what the Mavic Air 2 can do. Between the high frame rates, the decine-like mode, the HDR mode, I think this is a great option for most people. I'll leave a link to all the presets below. Until next time, have fun flying.